hyperreality, or the power of media. After the events of 2020, where the American election system was altered in strange and unusual ways, voters, and particularly strongly partisan voters, could be forgiven for becoming animated. Protesting was expected, and even rioting. All of the storefronts in Washington, D.C. were boarded up in anticipation of President Donald J. Trump's re-election. When that failed to materialize, the boards came down. We now know they were bracing for riots from the other side of the political spectrum. And this is partly why the events that occurred 2 months later were so shocking for those in D.C. The weeks that followed the 2020 election were confusing, polarizing, and combative. The Trump side alleged fraud. Ballot counts were inexplicably stopped in the middle of the night in multiple states. In the months before November, Democratic activists and elected officials had sought friendly consent judgments or altered regulatory rules to lower signature matching requirements, essentially remove oversight of potential ballot harvesting, allow mail-in voting, and other substantive, significant changes to the way elections were conducted in many of the most vital swing states. Regardless of whether the reader believes there is fraud or not, what is indisputable is that these changes fundamentally altered the way campaigns needed to be conducted, and the Trump people were behind the 8 ball. These stories of changed voting procedures, ballot dumps, destroyed records, and so forth, while disturbing before a winner was announced, became incendiary after the media declared Joseph R. Biden to be the winner of the election. Many rumors, conspiracy theories, and videos of alleged improprieties circulated on the internet. Grifters of all varieties latched onto absurd theories. As all trust in the media had been eroded, there's no way for the mainstream media to rein in any of this, and they did not try to. Instead, there's mostly name-calling and debunking. On January 6, 2021, President Trump addressed a rally and drove back to the White House. A crowd of people made their way into the Capitol building, and the protest turned into a riot. One Trump partisan, a young woman, was shot to death by security. There were other injuries, but no other fatalities as a result of the rioting. At this point, what might simply be considered a political riot, akin to the other political riots that took place in the summer of 2020, was given a different narrative by the U.S. mainstream media. The riot was labeled an insurrection. Congress attempted to impeach Donald Trump yet again over it. A nationwide search for suspects was conducted, with the FBI and liberal sadists posting pictures of faces and urging people to turn in the suspected insurrectionists. Family members snitched on each other under this media pressure. Many right-wing partisans were held without bail, or very high bail, in D.C. prisons for months and sometimes years before trial, often in poor conditions. Juries drawn from the citizens of Washington, D.C. are 9-1 Democratic. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been charged and hundreds imprisoned. Recently, Tucker Carlson, the Republican opinion presenter, obtained 41,000 hours of video footage of the incident. He released selected clips, which showed protesters following velvet guide ropes in a foyer, and even the man dressed in a Viking costume being calmly led by policemen who showed him around the building. Other clips show calm interactions. Protesters look like tourists, looking at paintings. The perspective of the January 6th incident conveyed is very different from what we have seen so far. Carlson's opponents, of course, claim deceptive editing. This too is a narrative, one we are all too familiar with now. In the summer of 2020, the media created political riots by amplifying statistically insignificant local crime stories into totems of national outrage. Billions and billions in property damage and dozens of dead resulted, along with a boom in violent crime, particularly murder, as police scaled back patrols out of fear of legal and political restrictions. Yet, the narrative on these events is one of mostly peaceful protests, social justice, and so forth. Major politicians raised money to bail rioters out of jail. Every major corporation supported these attacks on law and order. On May 31st, 2020, a riot outside the White House grew so severe that 50 Secret Service agents were injured as the mob stormed the president's residence. As the outside fences of the White House were breached, Trump had to be evacuated to a bunker underneath the property. Yet this incident, and the many other deaths, beatings, and arsons of the 2020 electoral season, have no place in the public consensus any longer. As Jacques Ellul says, one fact has been immediately replaced by another in the public mind by mere repetition. We can imagine an alternate world where the media did the reverse, emphasized the violence of the summer of 2020 and downplayed the riot of January 6th. We can imagine a world where the events of May 31st, 2020 were framed as an attempted lynching of the president. We can imagine a nationwide crackdown, manhunts, federal law enforcement perp walking the accused. We can imagine media personalities discussing the conspiracy theories held by the defendants, their bizarre ideologies. We can imagine this attack being called the Second Pearl Harbor. We do not live in that world, however. This is all to say that we do not condone breaking the law, but we must admit that facts are strange things. There are so many facts, so many moving parts in any situation that the selective emphasis on one or two facts over a few others may give the viewer or reader an entirely different impression of the event than another curation. The truth is, as always, in the context. The edification provided by the release of the January 6th footage is not that it proves anything about the event itself. It emphasizes to us, once again, that with the power to report true facts and select the facts to be presented, our media grants itself the right to completely shape culture, government, and even law enforcement in this country. This power is completely unaccountable to the public and immune from any liability or damage to the public mind or social fabric. Reforming, or otherwise taming this system, the system of selective narration, private culture creation, which is held in a tight oligarchy, must be a primary objective of any true attempt at a state. Without control over this formidable power, any government essentially only serves at its pleasure. This is intolerable.
Try to fight this feeling, searching for a guide.